This is just one of the things which can be used. Now, let's go back to the presentation. So you can use close-up pictures as one idea. They help you to brush the vocabulary, and this is an interesting way to make students want to explain why they think so. So basically, they learn to provide evidence, and they play, and this is interesting. Alternatively, as I said, you can use the "What is it?" video quizzes, which are very, very similar. So let's play one of those quizzes. Just a moment. I'm sorry I keep switching between the slides and everything, but my phone broke in the morning. So before starting the presentation, I had to dash to the store and buy a new phone, because otherwise I would have left. I would have been left without. I would have been left without any means of contacting people. Right. So let's take a look at this quiz. So once again, I'm going to show you pictures from nature, and let's try to guess what they are. So what is this? Now, the good thing about this quiz is that it has a countdown timer. So you can use this timer, and you can do it as a team game, so that, for example, the students will have time to answer. So what can you see in this picture? Any ideas? No? Well, let's see how it works. It's a frog. Now, what about this one? Can you tell what it is? Now, what about this one? This one is easy. So you see somebody's muzzle. Yeah, that's a cheetah. Okay. A leopard. So it wasn't a cheetah, but that was pretty close. What about this one? That's a flower. What kind of flower is it? It's an orchid. That's right. But it really looks like an iris. It looked like an iris to me. So my first reaction was it was an iris. What about this one? Any ideas? It's a jellyfish. Let's see if it is jellyfish, but it certainly is some kind of fish. It's a starfish, but you were close there. And there is a number of, and what's this? I quite like this video. A horn, a rhino, okay. 2 hippos, but it really looks like a rhino. So that's kind of thing you can use to play with your students. And once again, as I said, this is a brilliant game. This is a wonderful game that helps your students to brush up their vocabulary, but at the same time, it allows them to it allows us to hone their evidence providing skills. So here are 2 quizzes, 2 video quizzes, but you can find a lot more of similar quizzes online. Now, after you've used pictures and videos, there can be another game and another activity to help your students to find and provide evidence. You can use mini texts, which help your students to see textual evidence. Some of these activities are very, very familiar. Like, for example, you ask your students to join 2 short sentences into a longer one. There should be no T in that word. Like for example, in this sentence, she sneezed, she had a cold. She sneezed because she had a cold. And that's unfortunately a very, very, very timely phrase when everybody is concerned with coronavirus. Or you can use such sentences to teach to use linking words. Like, for example, her face was red, she was panting, she was in a hurry. Apparently, she was in a hurry, like this. Another exercise, we're going to have some more games, and you're going to see them. Another exercise helps your students to bridge the gap between the claim and the evidence. Because it is one thing to provide the evidence, but it is a totally different thing to be able to select the correct evidence, something which would be relevant for the problem. So you ask your students to fill in the gap with a fact that proves the conclusion. And here comes the very, very handy word cheater. So thank you so much for those who have already used this word in the chat earlier. So this is a cheater. You cannot outrun it. Which sentence, which factual evidence can you use in between to link the two sentences together? So this is a cheater. You cannot outrun it. Why? Now, we don't use the preposition. We need a sentence, like, for example, so why can't you outrun a cheetah? It runs 100 kilometers per hour. So can we put it like this? This is the cheetah. The cheetah is the fastest animal in the world. You cannot outrun it. Yes, it's the fastest animal. That's right. Let's take a look at some more examples like this. This is a diamond. We will be rich. Now, you do not always have to ask the students to find some factual evidence. You can be as creative as you like, and we are going to gain momentum as we go. We're going to become more and more creative in the next two slides. So this is a diamond. If we steal it, we will be rich. Okay. This is an evidence, but that's something which I wouldn't like my students to tell their parents about. Okay, but that's a brilliant idea. Number two, she is a teacher. Now we need to provide the fact and to give the conclusion. So what two sentences can we use to create an argument from the word she is a teacher? One of the possible phrases is this: she is a teacher, she has many hours to teach, she is usually tired. But that's not something you would like to think of on a Sunday afternoon. Can we think of some positive sentences? She is a teacher. She knows a lot of information. She is very clever. Okay, she is clever. So we thought about the same thing. How about this one? She is an angry teacher. What two sentences can we use? So the previous one was she is a teacher, she is clever, she can help you. Okay. She's an angry teacher. What can we say here? You have to obey her. But this is the evidence. We need to give a reason. So she's an angry teacher. She penalizes pupils, so you have to obey her. Okay. Oh, she's an angry teacher. She's at work. She penalizes pupils. Once again, not a very happy picture, but that's something you can play with, because some students could say, she's an angry teacher. Give her an apple. She will calm down. And that would also be another idea. She's overworked and underpaid. Okay, that's what often happens. Another thing that can help you is to use a rubric with your students like this. When you ask them to break down the facts that they find in the text into claim, evidence, and what it proves, or when they try to create evidence of arguments of their own, they can also break them down into three categories: into claim, evidence, and what it proves. And this helps them to understand the structure of the argument better. Now, tell me, please, at what age, or with what age of students do you think we could use the games and this rubric that I have just shown you? Like, you know, the video where you have to guess what the object is and explain your reasons. The phrases which you have to complete to turn into arguments. So 12 plus, okay. Yes, it works fine with adolescents. And as I said earlier, for younger students, you can use just pictures, unusual pictures like kangaroos in the snow or whatever, which help your students to rely on their background knowledge and to use that background knowledge to speak in the lesson. Because very often, far too often, I would say, we rely on the information that students find in the textbook. And this is not the main idea of the lesson. The main idea is to be able to help the students to connect the things they learn in the lesson to their background knowledge and to their everyday lives, so that they would understand what fun it is to use and to learn the English language. Now, if you work with longer texts, you can ask your students to underline or to highlight claim and highlight all evidence in its support. And you can also use videos to teach students to find evidence. A good idea is to ask students to work in small groups. You play a video and you ask your students to jot down all claims and evidence to compare their notes. And then you ask the group leaders to report their ideas to the class. For this reason, video ads work fine, because in video ads, they try to provide a lot of evidence because they want to prove, they want to persuade you to buy their products. But for all the students, you can also use TED Talks videos because they also provide a lot of evidence there. And in this way, this would be a great listening practice. And at the same time, this is a great conversational exercise. But what it focuses on is logic and the structure of arguments. One of the things which is normally and very, very unfortunately not taught at Russian schools is teaching students to distinguish between facts and opinions. What is the difference and why do we need to know it? First of all, we need to distinguish between fact and opinion to be able to tell when somebody is trying to deceive us, because there are very many TV personalities, there are very many bloggers, there are very many journalists, there are lots of people around who try to pass their opinions as facts. And basically what they do is they try to deceive you. And this is a big problem. If you want to be undeceived, we need to be able to distinguish between those things. And the biggest problem is that very often people do not see any difference. Let's play this game. Let's learn how we can do it. So facts are normally supported by figures, data, or other types of verifiable evidence. And verifiable is the keyword here. I am putting it on the slide. I've put it on the slide the way I would tell my students about it. That's why I go into such detail. And opinions are often followed by emotions without evidence. And given the fact that we have just talked about finding evidence, showing evidence, providing evidence, seeing the evidence, it would not be difficult for the students, or it would not be too difficult to distinguish between facts and opinions. Like, for example, let's take a look at these sentences. Tom has one brother and two sisters. Is it a fact or an opinion? You can just write F or O in the chat. So let's see if we see eye to eye here. Yes, that's a fact. You can count the brother and the sisters. Next one, Katie's new room is wonderful. Is this a fact or an opinion? That's an opinion, because what is wonderful for some people will look totally horrible to other people. Next one, Ms. Jones is the best teacher. Is this a fact or an opinion? It's an opinion, because everybody knows that we are the best teachers, not Ms. Jones. I'm just kidding. The last one, Ms. Jones students have the best results in English tests. Is this a fact or an opinion? That's a fact. Let's play some more of this game, because it is really fun, even when you start thinking about these things. Now, this game is not very easy, and we'll try to do it because this is a very good game for basically very different levels of English. Number one, eating fast food isn't bad if you only eat it once a week. Is it a fact or opinion? Now, numbers and figures can very often be deceiving. And here we have to rely very heavily either on our background knowledge or on the knowledge that we can find. So I would normally wait for the students' answers, and then I would ask them to go online, if we can use the telephones in the classroom, and try to find some evidence to prove that as a fact, or to tell that this is an opinion. So is this a fact or opinion? Now, to be able to distinguish between which sentence we are talking about, could you please write the number of the sentence, like 1, and then put F or O in the chat, so that we wouldn't forget that we're not talking about the previous sentence. Okay, that's an opinion because it has no evidence and there is no proof. But if some students want to, they can do a little bit of exploration at home and then come back to the next lesson and say whether it is truly a fact or opinion. Number 2, the chicken sandwiches are more expensive than double cheeseburgers. Is this fact or opinion? this is probably a fact because you can verify it. You can go online, you can find the menu, and you can see the prices. Number 3, copying homework assignments is wrong. Is this a fact or opinion? That's a tricky question. Okay, for some people it is opinion. Okay, for most people it is opinion, unless it is a rule at school. If it is a rule, then this would be a fact. It is also rooted in the culture. Like, for example, have you ever taught Chinese students, by the way? I once had a class of Chinese students who came to Russia to learn Russian and English. And that was not an easy task because communicative exercises just don't work with Chinese students as well as they would work with Russian students, because Chinese is a very ancient culture which believes that silence is golden. For them, it is more important to find information rather than to create information, because with the 3,000 years of their civilization, they think that a lot has already been created. So a lot of Chinese students do not see any problems with copying homework assignments, because for them, the most important thing is to be able to find information. And this already is a good reason to praise them. And for us, if you copy homework assignment, it is not enough, because you expect our students to do something themselves rather than just to find the answers, no matter what the students think about that. So sentence number 3 would be weighed down as opinion from, by a lot of Chinese students that I know. I cannot say by all students or by majority of them, but by a lot of them. And by us, it was also marked as opinion. Number 4, students who are caught cheating in college can be kicked out of the university without a refund. This is probably a fact, because it looks like this is rooted in the rules. And number 5, sometimes curly hair looks better than straight hair. Is this a fact or opinion? This is an opinion. Unless you do a survey and you say that according to 500 people out of 600 surveyed, curly hair can sometimes look better than straight hair, then you would at least provide some evidence. By the way, would you rather agree with this statement or would you rather disagree that sometimes curly hair looks better than straight hair? Oh, some people would disagree. So once again, if somebody says, I disagree, and then the other students say, I agree, then this is clearly an opinion. And that's another trick you can teach your students. Do you like this kind of exercise? This is a good conversation starter because it helps your students to start providing their opinions, but at the same time, they will try to look for facts. And then they begin to realize you can use another type of sentences here, and then you can also turn it, you can add some additional dimension, add some additional value to this exercise. You can turn it into a values clarification exercise. Like, for example, sentence number 3, copying homework assignments is wrong, is clearly about clarifying values, because some people would say, oh, I see nothing wrong with it, and others would say, oh, I agree it's wrong. And then the students see that their opinion and their position is not universal and that not everybody supports it. And this is important. Like, for example, if you use phrases like, women shouldn't work, they should be able to stay at home and raise their family. Some people would say, oh, I agree with that. But then there would be other people, a lot of girls actually, who would say, how can you say that women shouldn't work? It's true that they should be able to stay at home, but saying that they shouldn't work is wrong. And then you can start a big conversation, and that could become a great lead-in to an opinion essay. But then again, they would need to take a look at the facts. Irina asks if you will get the presentation. I will send this presentation to TrendyEnglish, but if you'd like to, I have given you my email address. Let me write it once again. Feel free to write to me and I will send you this presentation because it has some links which you will probably not be able to remember from the screen. Okay, let's continue. Here are some good fact versus opinion worksheets. They are ready-made You can download them for free from these websites, and they're licensed for free use in the classroom. So feel free to use that. You can also use some online games. We're not going to play those online games right now, but those games are, they're like detective games. So basically what happens is your students need to distinguish between facts and opinions. You will probably not be able to spend a lot of time in the classroom to play those games. But what I would do is I would start that game in the classroom, play it for about 10 minutes after you've talked about the difference between facts and opinions and so on. And then I would tell my students to play that game at home. Or if you have some extra time, you can use that time for this game, for those games. And one of those games has a plot. One of them tells about a group of explorers who landed on a strange planet, and there is a settlement there, a settlement by Earthlings. And different crimes, big and small, start happening. And they need to explore the evidence. They need to talk to people. They need to listen to those people to be able to investigate those crimes. And obviously, some people provide facts, some people provide opinions. So this is a very interesting game which focuses your students' attention on minor detail, which helps your students to distinguish between facts and opinions, to focus on those things, and to try and find solutions. Another thing which our students very often overlook is the credibility of the sources. And this is also a big problem. You need to check the credibility of the sources, because to be able to tell sometimes whether this is a fact or opinion, whether this fact is important at all, whether this fact is not an exception, and how this fact builds into a broader picture, you need to see how credible the source is. Here are the questions which you might want to consider before deciding on the credibility of the source. The questions are: who is the author? How recent is the source? What is the author's purpose? Whether the author is presenting a neutral and objective view of a topic, or is the author advocating one specific view of a topic? And another important question is, who is funding the research or writing of this source? The next question is, what type of sources does your audience value? Because clearly you will be looking for different sources if you write a PhD thesis, or if you are preparing to speak in front of the other students. And when you evaluate internet sources, here is some very important advice. You should never use websites where an author cannot be determined, unless this site is associated with a reputable institution, such as, for example, a respected university, a credible media outlet, a government program, and now government programs are not always to be trusted, no matter what country they come from, or a government department, or well-known non-governmental organizations. So it is important to think about those things. And you can use this kind of template for evaluating stories or articles. Like, for example, if you have a reading program for your students, like, for example, you ask your students to read books or to read stories and then answer questions or whatever, I would use this or similar template to teach your students to understand what information they can rely on and what information is just opinions. This template has the following sections: source and their credibility. So the students fill in the table, they write down the title, the author, and whether the story is credible or not. And what helps them? They need to understand the claim of the article, the main argument, the best evidence, what counter arguments could be made for this source. Then they see what facts do not hold true, what facts cannot be checked. And then they explore what claims the sources make that should be further questioned, examined, or defined. This is basically a great template to develop critical thinking in students, and it does not require a lot of effort on the side of the teacher, but on the part of the student, it makes them think and explore those things. So feel free to use this template. It's really interesting. And there are another thing. Students need to be taught that there can be some logical fallacies. By logical fallacies, we means we mean things, cases when people try to persuade somebody without referring to the logic, but rather by trying to avoid the logic. There is a large list of them. Let's go over them very quickly. But these things are used to make people stop thinking, basically. So, for example, some people say this: if A happens, then eventually through a series of small steps, Z will happen too. For example, if you ban hammers because they're bad for the environment, eventually the government will ban all cars, so we should not ban hammers. It looks like an argument, but it has no proof. It has no evidence. There is no link between the first step and the final step. That's why it cannot be used in an essay. It will not be counted as an argument in an academic essay. Another problem is when a conclusion is based on insufficient or biased evidence. For example, like this, and I know a lot of students like this. Even though it's only the first day, I can tell this is going to be a boring course. Do you ever get such students? Or do you know such people who look at something and say, oh, I don't like it. It's going to be boring. For example, my elder brother is like this. When you give him a present, he will first of all find some faults with it. And he finds faults which look very, very important. And then after 10 minutes, he says, oh, it's actually not that bad. And then 20 minutes later, he says, oh, it's a great thing. Thank you so much. So there are some people who tend to look on the dark side of things at first, and then they see the bad things. If you have such students, you can use them in discussions to search for counter arguments, and they will be brilliant at that. Another logical fallacy has the Latin name post hoc ego propter hoc, which means that something is not just because something happened after something, it does not mean that something happened because of something. Like, for example, I drank bottled water and now I'm sick, so the water must have made me sick, which reminds me of the joke about those people who ate some sweets after they drank vodka, and then they say, oh, those sweets must be wrong, I'm not feeling good in the morning. Something like this. Another fallacy is when a conclusion is based on an argument that the origins of a person or an idea or a theory determine its character, nature, or worth. So, like, for example, they say, oh, he's a bad man. That's why his ideas cannot be good. We know that this is not true. We know that, unfortunately, there are a lot of people who are not very nice, but they come up with great ideas. We know a lot of actors who play brilliant and wonderful characters, but in real life, those actors are not very good. I have some actors friends. I'm not talking about anyone in particular, but what I'm trying to say is that actors and their characters can be very, very, very different people. I have a friend whom I'm very, very proud of. He is an actor. He is a stage artistic director. So he creates all the artwork for operas, for plays, and he's a wonderful, wonderful artist. I have some pictures by him, and recently the Sèvres manufacturer in France created a series of table set, a series of vases, which is called Anna Karenina, and it used Ivan's pictures. So I'm very proud of him, but I know that Ivan makes wonderful pictures, and sometimes his pictures are really sad, while he is a very bright and cheerful person and a great guy. So you cannot judge a book by its cover. You cannot judge a man by the pictures. You cannot judge an idea by the personality of its originator. So that would be a fallacy which you cannot use in an essay. And we are coming very, very close to talking about academic essays and exam situations. Begging the claim. That's when you try to validate the conclusion by the claim itself. Like, for example, filthy and polluting coal should be banned. You do not explain how coal is filthy and polluting, but you already name it this. You give it this name and you say that it should be banned only because you have given it its name, which will not work in an academic essay, although sometimes it works pretty well in family arguments. And a circular argument, which rather than proves the argument, only restates it. Like, for example, George Bush is a good communicator because he speaks effectively. We know that he is not a good communicator, he does not speak effectively. But rather than proving your claim, you just repeat it using different words. Sometimes some authors provide false choices to their readers. They oversimplify the argument. Like, for example, they say something like, we can either stop using cars or destroy the earth. And this is one of the logical problems which comes up very often in student essays in EGA situations. There is an argument ad hominem when you attack the person's character rather than their opinions. Like, for example, Greenpeace's strategies aren't effective because they're all dirty, lazy hippies. That's what I read a lot online, and that's not true. And that's not an argument, let's put it this way. Or rather, the fact that some of them can be lazy hippies does not in any way undermine their strategies. Ad populum, you try to make an emotional appeal so that people would agree with you, not because they see the logic of your reasoning, but because they fall into the emotional trap. Like, for example, there are phrases like this: if you were a true American, you would support the rights of people to choose whatever vehicle they want. Of course, they have this right, but you can have lots of reasons not to support that choice of vehicle. And the people who say things like that, they make it sound as if if you don't make that choice, if you don't support those people, you are not a true American, which is not true. But it takes some reasoning to disprove this argument. And the last one is red herring. This is actually a diversionary tactic that helps to avoid the key issues, often by avoiding opposing arguments rather than addressing them. Like, for example, the level of mercury in seafood may be unsafe, but what will fishers do to support their families? And we are not talking about fishes now, we're talking about the mercury in seafood. But they try to lead you astray. And these problems very often come up in academic essays. So let's learn how we can avoid those problems and what games we can play to create claims and evidence. Now, I promise this slide, the past two slides were the most theoretical ones and the most difficult to grasp because they contain a lot of information, which in itself needs a series of lessons. I would probably teach a lesson on each of the logical fallacies, and then it would work. But here is how you can help your students to create claims and evidence. This game is called Why? You give your students a controversial statement. Those who agree with it, like, for example, you can tell them something like, girls are usually better at languages than boys. And then you ask your students, those who agree, go to this wall of the classroom. Those who don't agree, go to that wall. And then in turns, they explain why they're standing in that position. So you ask them why. If they do not completely agree or do not completely disagree, they can stand somewhere in between. And that's really interesting. It gives your students a chance to move around. It provides a visual foundation for the logic. And here are some phrases like this. Let's play this game. Now, I'm going to read aloud a phrase, and I would like you to write down in the chat whether you agree or whether you disagree. Sentence number 1, all zoos should be shut down and the animals should be returned to the wild. Would you agree or would you disagree with this statement? So could you please write agree or could you please write disagree? Okay, Irina agrees, Olga agrees. Does anybody disagree? Okay, now let's look at your arguments. Why do you agree with this statement? Most of us are true teachers. We are very sympathetic, we're empathic, we think about the good of the living beings. But let's provide the arguments. Why do you agree that all zoos should be shut down and the animals should be returned to the wild? This is the most difficult part. That's when you have to provide your arguments. And I will provide counter arguments. Because it's cruel to keep animals in cages. Okay. Any other ideas? It helps animals to live in freedom and it helps to avoid suffering. Okay. Now, let me provide some counter arguments, because obviously if I play this game with my students, I'm always ready to provide the opposing arguments, whether for or against. But in the wild, a lot of animals will be killed by hunters, or they will be killed by birds of prey, or by the hunting animals. Okay, animals are usually kept in bad conditions, but many zoos help to save endangered species. Captivity has never made anyone happy, but we know that normally animals live about 30% longer in zoos than in the wild. So the question is whether you would like to live a life which is not very happy, but which is much longer, or whether you prefer to live a life which is not that long, but which can probably be happier. So you see how it works. One of the statements is enough to make your students argue and provide arguments for a long time. And that's really interesting. Lifespan is a feeble argument. I agree. It's not a very good argument, because some people would say that a terrible end is preferable sometimes to suffer without end. And that's true. I've seen some situations in life when an end came as a salvation, unfortunately. I'm afraid that the older we get, the more of those situations we see. So let's take a very quick look at some of the other statements like this. Mobile phones should be regularly used as learning tools in the classroom. Regularly used is the keyword here, and learning tools as well. And then I think we would also have our say. Some people would agree, some people would disagree, and we would be able to provide a lot of arguments. Or for example, school canteens promote poor diets. Would you rather agree or disagree with this statement about school canteens? Most people agree. No matter how good a school canteen is, the diet is still not very good. But how can you prove that those diets are poor? In what way are they poor? I'm checking the time to make sure that I don't overindulge myself, but we seem to have enough time. The quality of food is not very nice. Okay. What about the range of meals? Is the range good? Yeah, we're speaking about Russian canteens. That's what the child says. Okay, that's an evidence from somebody who's been there. The food is cold. Children have stomach problems. Okay, I have been to a couple of canteens, or during my travels around Russia, I've been to a wonderful canteen in Novokuznetsk, and I just went there during the lunch break, during one of my seminars. And I bought the same food as students bought. It was really, really nice. I've been to a great canteen in a school in Chita. And I've been to a very nice canteen. I don't remember where. It was probably in Volgograd, but I'm not sure. But I've been to some of them, which are not nice at all. And and in some schools, when I said, "Oh, where's the canteen? I'd like to go and buy something," the teacher would say, "Don't go there. We've got some cakes for you." So that was nice of them, but not very nice of the canteen. Okay, so here you have a lot of statements, and I am sure you can come up with dozens of them, which can be interesting for the students to discuss and debate. Here are some more ideas for discussion on which you can base your statements. Like, for example, you can talk about uniforms in school, whether they're a good idea or not a good idea. You can talk about skateboards on the premises, whether they should be allowed or whether they should not be allowed. You can speak about junk food at school, just as we have done. You can talk about whether family members should be paid for doing chores at home, and then who would pay the mother. We can talk about cafeteria food quality, where to go on a field trip, whether graffiti is a good or a bad thing, whether animals should perform at circuses. You can talk about bullying, cruelty to animals, cloning. Basically, you can talk about anything. Here are a few ideas which you can turn into those controversial statements. and opinion gap is a brilliant, brilliant motivation for discussions. Let's have a look at some more activities to create claims and evidence. One of them is called mapping. Students are given a broad question, which is likely to result in many different answers. For example, what books should every person read? Students write their responses on post-it notes, like this. So they write their responses on post-it notes, and they place the notes on the whiteboard. And then you ask your students to group the responses in categories by similarity. And then you discuss why those ideas fit within those categories, how the categories relate to one another, and so on. So this is a very good categorization exercise, which develops critical thinking in students, but also their ability to reason. And you don't need anything for this, apart from a whiteboard and a stack of stick-it notes, or post-it notes. Another game, which I particularly like and which students seem to love, is called a salesman. You need to do some preparation for this game. You need to prepare one set of cards with names or with pictures of things which have a very limited use in everyday life. Like, for example, a pack of blue construction paper, a roll of self-adhesive tape, like this, a box of nails, and then you prepare another set of cards with made-up names of organizations. Like, for example, the Retired Hamster Trainers Association, the STEM Collectors Club, the Tea Testers Association, and so on. And then you ask your students in turns to pick a card from each of the piles. Like, for example, from one pile, they pick a card with the word self-adhesive tape. And from the other pile, they pick up a card with the name of Tea Testers Association. And then your students think, discuss, design, and present an ad of this product for this audience, trying to explain why they need this item. Like, for example, how would you advertise self-adhesive tape to Tea Testers Association? What would they use? What would be effective for them?
2:30 навигатор почту.
2:30? Так быстро?
Okay, so any ideas? So, for example, I would say that tea testers normally need a lot of boxes of tea. And to keep them together, you can use this wonderful self-adhesive tape. Or you can use self-adhesive tape to stick samples of tea bags, which are used, to a board and write the names under them. You can't do it without it, because you can repair whatever. Yes, but what would tea testers need to repair? Imagine they want to repair a torn tea bag. Would they use self-adhesive tape? Probably not. So we need to think of a more specific example. So this game is not easy. It takes some time during the lesson, but students love to play it because it gives them a good chance to be creative, to use their language, and at the same time, they would look for claims and evidence. Here are some more activities. You ask your students to defend ridiculous statements. To do this, you write a number of ridiculous statements on the whiteboard. Or alternatively, you split the class in two and have one group write the statements for another and then trade, which makes the task even easier for the teacher. Students in pairs or in small groups choose a statement and write 3 plausible reasons in support of the statement. Now, here are some statements like this. For example, students should have unlimited access to chocolate during breaks. Now, could you please provide 3 reasons in support of this statement? It does not matter whether you agree or disagree with it. I would probably say students and teachers alike should have unlimited access to chocolate during breaks. But now, how would you prove this statement? Chocolate helps brain works better. That's one plausible reason. Brilliant. let's provide another reason. It boosts mental activity. That's basically the same, but well done. We keep thinking about the same things. We have the same logic. Chocolate makes a lot of people happy. That's another reason. So we have two. One of them is chocolate. It increases the level of happiness. It boosts mental activity. It improves the mood. Can we think of a third reason? I have a reason, but from the point of a teacher. When some students munch on chocolate, they keep silent. And that for me is a great reason to provide unlimited access to them. Okay, let's try to find 3 reasons for the second statement. Texting, sending text messages, should be the preferred method for answering teachers' questions, which means that you ask the question and all the students text their answers to you. Let's try to think of 3 reasons for this. Now, as I said, we know that these statements are ridiculous, but still, that's a great opportunity to have some fun. Okay, you can get anonymous answers. Well, not always, because if that's a text message, you normally know who sent it. Students pay much more attention to grammar. That's one great reason. May I steal your idea and say that students will pay much more attention to spelling. And again, it uses as a noise cancellation technique. Brilliant. So we have 3 ideas. Do you like this? Do you like this kind of activity? It makes your students think, and sometimes you have they come up with all sorts of very, very surprising ideas. And what I like about it is that you can do it with next to no preparation. Basically, you are on your way to work, and you decide to play this game. And while you are walking towards the classroom, you will already come up with a number of ridiculous statements. Or you can ask your students as a warming up activity to think of those statements, and they provide exercise for each other. Next one. Here is another activity. It takes a little bit longer, and it can be done either in class as group work or as homework. Once again, you will need some piles of cards. Pile 1 contains everyday objects, like pieces of clothing, etc., like a t-shirt, a spoon, a pen, etc. Pile 2 contains problems, like it is lumpy, it is leaking blue liquid, it smells like it is burning. Pile 3 contains explanations of the result, like, for example, it scared the cat, it gave an electric shock, it made the arm itch, etc. And pile 4 states what they want as restitution from the company. Like, for example, 10 more of the same items but in working condition, or a free dinner at an expensive restaurant, a trip to the factory, a trip to the seaside, and so on. Then students need to determine the story behind those events, and they write a letter to the company demanding the restitution, telling the story and giving arguments why it should be like that. Like, for example, oh, recently I bought a teaspoon from you, but every time I use it, it smells like it is burning. It scared my grandmother, who wanted to drink her morning coffee, and it felt like it was burning, and she thought it was a fire. There was a fire in the house, so she jumped out of the house from the window, wearing only her nightgown, and we had to spend 3 hours trying to find grandmother in the downtown where she ran because she was so scared. That's why I demand a compensation. I want you to provide a free dinner for my grandmother at an expensive restaurant. Something like that. I have just come up with this idea, but students will be far more creative and will get some more ideas. So that's another good exercise. It takes time at first, but it helps your students to be creative and to find arguments quickly. And this exercise is great not only for exams, but also for Olympiads. Here is a list of useful linking words you may want to give your students. I can tell you some really good about some really good books with linking words, but let's do it this way. Send me an email message to my address, and I will send you some pages from those books so that you can already use them. And I can send you some rubrics from those books so that you can use them when you prepare your students for exams. What else can you use? We need to teach our students to create counter arguments. Are you still active? I still have some time, because we still have some time, but are you still with me, or are you already too tired? Basically, what I'm driving at is, would you like me to finish faster, or is it okay to continue the way I go? Because we need, or we have some materials for the next 10 minutes or so. Full of beans. Okay, great. That's a brilliant idiom. And I once tried to find out where it came from. And it turns out that it came from horse races. When in the 19th century, when they wanted a horse to be strong, they would feed it with beans before the races. I don't know what effect it gave. It probably gave a lot of energy, but first of all, I thought it made the horses very reactive, like jet engines, but apparently I was wrong. Okay, so you need to do it as pair work. Students work in pairs. First, student one tells the partner all his or her arguments for a point of view on a set topic. The partner writes down a list of questions and counter arguments, and the partner's job is to challenge student one with questions or gaps in the arguments. And the listener has to give specific arguments. And this is quite a good point to introduce linking words to precede counter arguments. So basically, you ask your students to use those words, like this, for example. While it may be true that, nevertheless, it turns out that a common argument against this is, but skeptics may think that, but, and you can use these more complex words, like some argue that, they say that, on the other hand, and so on. So this is a good training practice for UK. Here are some linking words which you can use for paragraphs. Like, do you want a world with this? This is what will happen if, for years, something has been going on. Unfortunately, we have failed to realize that, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to read out a lot of them because you know them, but feel free to use them from this slide. Here are some more activities which you can use to create counter arguments. You can use scenarios. So, for example, you can hand out some real-life scenarios that students are familiar with. And you ask the students to brainstorm possible arguments that can be used by each side, and then use these arguments to role-play the situations. So once again, this activity will take up the entire lesson. You can use this scenario, for example. Two friends are outside a cinema, and each wants to watch a different film. Or probably a parent and a child. The child wants a later curfew to go to a party to a friend's house. You will probably need to explain to students that in some families, children have to be back at home by a specific hour, which is called a curfew. This hour is the curfew. And when you go to a party to a friend's house, you want this curfew to be lifted for a day. And then you need to think of the arguments that the child will say, and then the counter arguments that the parent will use, and then you role play those dialogues. And the task in the dialogue is to find a consensus. Or, for example, you can make it more fun by asking your students not to find a consensus, which can also be a game. You can use some other scenarios like this. For example, a student and a teacher, and the student wants an extension on the paper. And the student has to think of the reasons, and the teacher has to decide and to ask questions and to provide counter arguments. Or, for example, a parent and a child. The family has planned a trip during school holidays, and the child wants to do something with friends instead, rather than go on a family trip. Something like this. Another game that you can play, or rather an activity, is the so-called pinwheel group discussion. You divide class into 4 groups. Then there are 3 groups which are tasked with representing a particular view on a problem. And group 4 are the provocateurs, and their task is to keep the discussion going. The groups are sitting closer to the room corners, so they form a square, and groups take turns to present their arguments and questions, and the provocateurs only present questions. Their task is to challenge the three groups' arguments. That's one way of organizing this activity, but it helps the students once again to move around a bit and to play different roles from which they will form a big discussion. So as I said, this can be a good preparation activity to prepare for debates because you can easily focus on appropriateness of style in the proceedings. What would a possible lesson structure for advanced students look like students in grades 10 and 11? First of all, you introduce the topic and you find out the students' opinions, for example, using the why activity. Then you ask students to write down their arguments. Then you ask students to come up with possible counter-arguments and write down a list of arguments and counter-arguments on the board. Then you discuss them and decide which ones the class are going to use. So basically you cross out the least relevant ones. Then you give students a paper on a similar topic. You analyze what arguments and counter-arguments are used and ask what students like and what they would do differently. So you provide your students with a ready written paper, either by a different class or by a paper from the internet. Then you show students an outline of the paper, which they will need to write themselves, if there is one. For example, you provide them with a YEGA task or with another exam task where the outline is given. You give your students a list of linking words that can be used. The linking words are there in this presentation, and that list can be expanded, of course. You ask your students to write their drafts as homework. So basically, this was lesson 1. The students do the talking and the discussing in the class, and then they write the drafts of their paper as homework. And they have analyzed a sample paper, not as a model to follow, but as a sample which can be improved. In the next lesson, you do some peer correction. That is, you ask your students to read and correct or comment on each other papers. Comments can cover a wide range of issues, not just the use of language, like how persuasive the argument is, how valid the argument is, whether there is enough evidence, and so on. Then students edit their papers, either in class or part of their homework, and then they submit them to the teacher. So basically, it takes 2 lessons to write a good essay. 2 lessons and at least 1 editing after peer correction. If you look at YEGA and other exams, and we are nearly finished. Now, if you look at YEGA and other exams, there is one important thing. Answers to task 40 in YEGA do not require extended evidence for arguments. But in other popular exams, they do need extended arguments. In YEGA, an argument can consist of a claim and a reason, without much or basically without any further evidence. So this is not a complete argument from the point of view of formal academic writing logic. And in YEGA, logical fallacies may be overlooked. So you don't have to be too heavy on those logical fallacies. But I thought that it would be a good idea because we are honing exam skills, and it is very likely that in a couple of years, there may appear a different model for YEGA after YEGA has become a compulsory task, a compulsory exam. So a different model can appear, so who knows what kind of thinking and what kind of reasoning it will require for the advanced stage. Here is a sample essay paragraph, our sample essay, written by an American student. We're not going to read it now because it will take up too much time, but I will be happy to send you the presentation. Sorry, I will be happy to send you the presentation so that you can use this essay or you can find a lot of similar essays online. You can use a letter in which, so you can use this essay, sorry, let's go back to this slide, to ask your students to identify arguments, to identify reasons, to identify evidence, and to ask whether they like those evidences, those arguments and evidence and reasons, or what can be improved. On the whole, this is not a brilliant essay, but it is very good. So the students will have something to learn, but at the same time, there will be still some room for improvement. You can also use letters for this purpose with younger students. You can give a letter and you ask your students to complete it by providing reasons and evidence. Something like this. So basically, I'm nearly finished, and let's discuss a little bit, very, very quickly, what we have been talking with you about. So tell me, please, was there any new information for you? Your experienced teachers, you have taken and passed successfully Cambridge proficiency exams, TOEFL exams, IELTS, and so on. So basically, you already know most of what I've been talking about, but was there any new information for you? Yes, okay. What techniques or activities will be useful in your class? All of them. That's great, because I tried to select activities which would not depend on the kind of textbook you use, which would be very universal and which would require very, very little or no preparation on the part of the teacher. Would you say that some activities will take some training and getting used to on the part of your students? I would say that the students would have to get used to some of them, because basically we have been talking about training critical thinking in your students, teaching them to distinguish between facts and opinions. It can be done easily, but it is easy when you can do it. And when you learn, it does not seem so easy. Which of these techniques or activities are you going to try and use in the next few months? I'm just interested in what you're going to take back to your homes and your classrooms. Photos, okay. All of them. Well, they're worth trying. I've used, I'd say I've used most of them at one point or another, at one time or another, and they all work. There is no reason why they wouldn't work, even with the students who are reluctant speakers, because I have shown you a range of activities which can be used with lower level students and with pretty high level students. And it was interesting even for us as teachers and experienced speakers and thinkers to use some of those activities and play those games. So they would be used. Here is once again my email address. Please feel free to write to me to get the presentation. I will be happy to send it out to you. I will also be able to send you some materials and some useful links. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them because we still have some time. Okay. Well, if there are no questions, okay, like advertising for different groups. Yeah, it is creative, it will work, and it is really fun. Basically, what I showed to you is really interesting, and it works just fine. It could be a great continuation, a great next step, like, for example, for a lot of games that Yelena Peresada offers, because there are a lot of games where you find alibis, where you do lots of discussion things, and so on. You can use the vocabulary that Yulia Vershinikova has been showing to you, and you can use those games to boost students' vocabulary. So this is certainly not a capstone, but it adds to a lot of things you have been talking about today. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to finish my presentation then. I will be looking forward to hearing from you via email. Okay, thank you for the information. Please send the presentation. I will send the presentation. Of course, just a second, I'm going to copy the... Okay, I'm going to copy the